Good afternoon. Thanks all for coming in your post-lunch time. This is always a very special time of day when you really meant to be there if you're here. So I appreciate you all being here. Today, Jonas and I are going to talk about building vibrant communities in open source. Basically based on lessons that we've both learned in the various communities that we have been part of. Just to give you a little introduction of me, first of all, my name is Krista Burdine. I'm a writer and a speaker, and I love the idea of including everybody in open source. I like that in all ways, but also especially in open source. A couple of fun things about me. I will always make time for pictures of black cats. I love tiny food. It will make me squeal like a little girl if you bring me a cupcake that's this big. I don't know why. It just is. And I love to travel, which is what has been one of my favorite parts about being involved in open source and being involved with my open source community. I am the community manager for Rocky Linux. I am focused on, our Rocky Linux is focused on equipping and empowering contributors to thrive in technical community. To me, this is the important piece of open source. The code is important, but the group of people, I never want to lose sight of the people that are what makes open source. I am personally on a mission to help open source projects support their contributors and also to help open source contributors support themselves. My superpower is finding lost things. I don't know why, I always know where it is. So that's just a little bit about me. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonas Rosland. I'm the Director of Community at Vast Data. I run a non-open source focused community. It's a user and partner and customer community for our AI integrated data platforms. I'm a community builder. Some of you might have been to some of my other talks at various different open source conferences. This is my favorite open source conference, bar none. I love this place, and thank you so much for being here. On the side, I'm a dad with one wonderful daughter and a crazy dog that drives my wife insane, but I love her, both my wife and the dog. I'm also the executive director for HitSave, a video game preservation and history nonprofit, and I'm an aspiring project finisher. I'm a tinkerer. I love starting things, and I have a really hard time doing the last piece of things to finally complete those projects. And with that, we're going to dive into some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So when we look at open source interactions and open source communities, first off, who here is a community manager or a lead for a community? Okay, got a few of you here. Awesome. Who here are involved in open source communities? Most of you. Fantastic. So when we look at open source communities, we need to make our way away from the notion that I'm the most important thing and everything that I do is amazing. Instead, we look at how we can collaborate with the open source community, with our contributors in a decentralized way, focusing on decentralized communication, making sure that we can have asynchronous communication across across the globe, essentially. And we want to be very explicit. When we explain something and when we talk about something, we need to be very explicit and make sure that everyone understands what we mean. Because if you are not successful in communicating what you're trying to build, what you're trying to do with an open source project, your contributors, your other teammates might have a real problem understanding what they're supposed to be doing. Another notion that comes up every now and then as well is that, hey, I open sourced a project and you can see the code here. It's fantastic. Go use it. That's a great start, but it's not the end all be all for open source projects. You have a ton more things that you need to do when you're building up an open source community. You can't just have code in a repository. You need to have proper documentation. You need to have proper tests in place. Integrations, make sure that you hit your releases, that those releases actually contain what you committed to the community to do during that time frame, so the community knows what to expect from you as well. Looking at community onboarding, which is really important. When someone comes in, they might just lurk, and that's perfectly fine. But we need to make sure that the people who want to do a little more than just lurk, they should be onboarded quickly and using mentorships, essentially. The last piece here, having proper communication channels. Yes, GitHub is great for tracking issues and PRs, but it's not great for having actual conversations. So make sure you have a communication channel where you can have proper communication between users of your project, the maintainers, the developers, the product managers, everyone. That could be a forum, that can be Slack, Discord, Mattermost, like Rocky is using. So you can do a lot with these communication channels, making sure that you have a place where all of the community congregates and communicates with each other. To really hammer on this point of non-code contributions, what I do as a community manager is a lot of community education and community enablement. I want to enable my members to do what they want to do within a community. We want them to be contributors, we want them to be reviewers, or maybe even maintainers at one point. When you look at your community, you also need to look at what people can help with. So getting more people on the documentation team. That documentation team might just be one person, and they're also a dev right now. And that's not the best. The developers, they usually write fantastic technical documentation, but it might not be as easy to follow compared to if you had an actual technical writer in place there. We also do a lot of outward-facing community work, so hosting and presenting at meetups and conferences, creating visual representations of what you're trying to do as well. You can describe a thing in 1,000 words, but you can also create a very visually pleasing image that makes people understand what you're trying to build and why you're trying to build it. I talked about the documentation team twice already. But there is other writing as well that's really important when it comes to communicating from a community standpoint. Looking at blog posts and press releases if it's a corporately backed open source project. But also operation manuals and walkthroughs and how-tos. All of that is crucial for people to understand how to use your project, how to interact with it, maybe even how to integrate with it, and also how to expand on it. One of the things that the Kubernetes project did for events, because they have the big event, KubeCon, obviously, but one thing that's done during every KubeCon is an event called the Contributor Summit. Has anyone heard of that or been a part of the Contributor Summit? All right, this is news to many of you. Awesome. So the Contributor Summit is a fantastic way for the Kubernetes community to get together, and usually it's between 100 and 200 people that join in for a full day of learning how to contribute to the Kubernetes project, which is really cool. So you get a lot of new contributors, a lot of new people into the project during that day. Of course, some of them maybe only focus on contributing during that day and then do nothing afterwards, but that's fine. We're still teaching a ton of people how to contribute to the Kubernetes project and be integrated into that project. And that Contributor Summit event is all volunteer-led. So it's all volunteer-led. I've been the event lead. I've been the marketing lead there as well. And I volunteered to be that. And you have a whole staff of other volunteers putting together this fantastic event. So someone then has to manage the volunteers. So you can see there's a ton of different personas and different experiences and knowledge that's needed to pull off something this big. And the last one here, which is really important, but not everyone enjoys it, is of course triaging issues and making sure that they get responded to in a good amount of time. You don't want to have issues left unnoticed or unresponded to for weeks or months or sometimes even years, because that just gives the person who actually took their time out of their day and reported this issue, it just makes them feel really bad about the community as a whole. So this is a really important topic when it comes to community management. Issue triaging, which might not feel like a community thing, but it absolutely is. So some of the lessons that we learned from some of the CNCF projects, and we're going to dive deeper into the community health at the end of the presentation as well, so make sure you stick around. But when we look at communities, I look at them as a living, breathing organism. They are full of people. People have feelings. People do different things. They have jobs, they have families, they have hobbies. Some of them want to spend their time, their hard-earned time, on actually contributing to your project. Make sure that they feel welcome and continue to follow up with the community members. Make sure that they feel like they're a part of the community. To measure the health of your community, we lean heavily on the work that has been done by the Chaos Project and the To-Do Group. They are fantastic projects. I know the Chaos Project is here as well. So if you haven't talked to them yet, absolutely go and see them. They're in near room 302, 301, I believe. When we look at community onboarding and onboarding individuals into our project, mentorships are super, super important. You can't just say, yeah, read the docs here on how to contribute. No, sit down with the person who wants to contribute. Spend half an hour actually learning what this person can do and what they want to do, because it might be that they can do something extraordinary that you haven't thought about yet. So make sure you take the time and talk to them, and then also continue to share the knowledge outside of the core team. One of the things that the Kubernetes project has done really, really successfully and really well is their release team. It's not a set group of people. So every release, there are different people involved in that release, which is really fantastic. And you get to be voted in to be on the release team. And it's not like you're just thrown to the wolves if you want to help out with the release team. No, you are put into a position. If you have never been on the release team before, you're put in the position as a shadow. You're shadowing someone else that already knows the procedure and the process for releasing a new Kubernetes release. And then next release, you can then be promoted to actually leading that effort. So it might be you leading the documentation, leading the testing, leading the integrations. It's a fantastic opportunity to really dive into how such a large open source project actually works and how it all ties together in the end and actually producing a new release. Another part on this sharing knowledge here, there is so much tribal knowledge, both in companies, in groups, in open source projects, where people just say, yeah, we know everything and everyone knows how it is. It's like, no, a new person will absolutely not know all the things within your open source project. So make sure that you document everything. So it's not all just stuck in people's heads, because people move away from open source projects. And if they move away and it's all tribal knowledge, then that knowledge also goes away. So make sure to document everything. Another piece here is establishing consistency in the community as well. So if you have community meetings or open office hours or something where the community can come have a conversation with the developers, with the other contributors, make sure it's on the same time every week. It's the same day, it's the same time, because then people know to block that time on their calendar. It's a really good idea to do that from the start, to have a really good structure of scheduled meetings so everyone knows what to expect. And also send out thank yous to your members. Thank you for creating this issue, which led us to actually fix this bug. Thank you for creating that PR for our documentation that really helped in explaining how this mechanism works within our project. Send out thank yous. It doesn't have to be a physical thing, a swag thing, or anything like that. Just a thank you. And a really easy way to do this, if you are publishing on GitLab or GitHub, just have all the contributors be thanked in the release notes. Super easy. There are several tools to do that, and all contributors are there. You can also, some projects also sort and say, we have some new contributors. Thank you for being a new contributor. And it's in the release notes. It's forever there for the, until the internet goes down. When it comes to collaboration, we want to make sure that we communicate in the open. We wear our agenda on our sleeves. Everyone knows that I'm from company X, you're from company Y, we have company Z over here, and we're all collaborating for a specific purpose on a specific project, but we all want different things out of that project. Just be honest. When I come into a meeting and I say, I would love to have this feature, this function, make sure you explain why that's important to you, your company, or your organization as well. Because then people know, oh, that makes sense, instead of just me saying, yeah, I would like that. So be very clear. Also, use public tools for issue tracking. That is a given for most open source projects, but some open source projects are sometimes just pushed out over to GitHub, and all the issue tracking is internal. Not a great idea. So don't do that. When I went into the Kubernetes project, one of the first things that I did was to look at who's in there and who does what. They're really good at documenting who does what. And for any new contributor or any new community member, if you just have a simple README or a maintainers.md file in your repo stating, here's the team lead, here's the community lead, here's the documentation lead, here's the release team, just list out the people and their handles in the communication channels that you have, then it's super easy for me to say, hey, I want to talk to someone on the release team, I'll ping these people. Super easy. And last but not least here, when you have contributors coming on, you want to have a clearly defined path for them to become a contributor, but then also go further and move into becoming a reviewer of PRs, and maybe eventually a maintainer as well. My last thing here, these are just a few things that have really helped the projects that I've been a part of when it comes to marketing themselves and making sure we understand the project. So the first thing you can see here, this is for the Harbor project. We have just a simple markdown file with a bunch of logos where these companies have self-reported that they use Harbor. And if you were to scroll down a little in that file, you would also see how they're using Harbor. They have a brief 2-3 sentence description of what Harbor is doing within their business and how it has helped them, which is really powerful. So if anyone asks, who's using this project and how are they using it? You just point to that. Super simple. It's not a bunch of press releases, it's not a bunch of blog posts. It's one document, everything is there. Top right, you have just a quick overview of the Antria project, another CNCF project. And the Antria project has tons of really good technical documentation, but they also have that particular image, which is really helpful if anyone wants to contribute to understand how that project actually works. And last but not least, if you have a documentation team, or if you have one person working on documentation, make sure you have a documentation style guide. There are many out there. This is the Kubernetes one. It's very, very good. But just have a style guide. So when someone is creating documentation, they know how to write the documentation, what it should look like, how you style different functions, how you handle code blocks, and so on. So really important, because then the documentation looks very familiar to anyone, anyone who's reading it, whichever page they're on.
Hello. So, as Jonas has already talked about, projects are more than just code. Open source in general is more than just code. It's even more than code plus the non-code contributions. Open source is a collection of the gifts that people have made, gifts of knowledge and time and other resources. So I would suggest that the foundational task of any open source project is to collect and organize and redistribute contributions in a way that benefits the community. So when I first became the community architect or manager or whatever you want to call that for Rocky Linux, I had to think a lot about how I could support people to make their contributions and how I could motivate them to help organize it and allow it to be redistributed, which would also in turn make it accessible for more people. So I started by looking at how people are motivated to do anything. I stumbled across a post on LinkedIn by an organization called CSR Group. I don't know. I just randomly found this article that was simply titled, "Understanding the 5 Salaries That Every Job Offers." And just the idea of thinking about that made me realize, oh yeah, jobs offer way more than just money. So what we're talking about is what are the things that motivate people to trade in their time for the benefit of the organization. Obviously, the first one is financial, but that doesn't fully account for why people might stay in jobs that don't pay very well, or why some employers have a lot of high turnover despite that they do pay very well. Obviously, it's more complex than that. And that certainly even more so doesn't account for open source. Because sometimes people in open source don't even want money out of it. They're looking for something entirely different. There are lots of reasons why people might want to contribute to open source. So how, besides the financial way, what are some other things that motivate people? One would be a psychological benefit. Part of being a part of an open source community means people are checking in with you. You have people to check in with, and you have a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. That can give a great satisfaction that can contribute to your sense of well-being. There are lots of social benefits, especially in open source, because so many people are there because they want to be. I don't think a lot of people are in open source because they hate it. If anything, they might want it to be better, but people in general are in open source because they believe in it and they get something out of it. So the social is good. You can also learn new things from open source community. This is actually how I became part of the community. because I was looking to improve my skills as a technical writer. So I came in through the documentation, the back door of the documentation team. But there's documentation, there's testing, there's learning how to use version control software. I think that was the single biggest hill I had to climb coming into open source, learning new technical things. And I see some nodding heads, so I think I'm not the only one. Learning how to use GitHub was a real challenge, but man, the satisfaction of a job where I submitted my first PR, and then, man, they're doing that Hacktoberfest competition right now, and I had to learn how to create issues and how to approve PRs. So I really did a little leapfrog over my previous abilities just in the last 30 days. But so educational is a wonderful reason to get involved in open source. And then there's this thing of freedom, the freedom to contribute as you see fit in the way that means most to you, as much as you see fit. And if you're not in a time right now where you can contribute so easily, you don't have to. There's such an open-handed attitude in open source. That is one of the reasons why people have a joy of being a part of it. So a good community will work to reward contributors by adding value through all of these different ways. And figuring that out has been, for me, probably the first work of becoming a community manager. So here I am, I'm this community manager, trying to figure out what I'm doing and realizing that this community has its own value above and beyond the value of the open source project itself. We want to focus on the contributors, especially the new people when they come in, because you get a window when people are new, when it's all fresh and exciting, and you want to capitalize on that and help keep them involved long enough to become part of the ongoing team. So after figuring all of this out, I was fortunate to meet Jonas, who taught me a little bit about the important details of running a project. The single task that I have been working toward out of the things that he taught me at the beginning of the year, the single task that I've done everything for this year has been to work toward this ease of onboarding idea. So you want to take it, somebody who's new, make it as easy as possible for them to continue. And I have chosen to do that by focusing on this idea, this concept that Jonas had already mentioned of making shared knowledge accessible. There's a lot of knowledge, that tribal knowledge he was talking about, that is part of a project. And we want to make it so that if somebody leaves, the knowledge that they helped pull together is still there in the project. We also want to make it so that when somebody comes in and encounters our project for the first time, if they don't meet a person first, they can at least figure out what we are about explicitly before deciding to go further. I don't know about you, but I often do that. I'll kind of check an organization out even before I ever make contact. Obviously, we want to have a mentor available and someone to hold their hand and get them involved and introduce them into the room and everything. That's all fantastic, but there's this step that comes first. So I'm going to give you 4 ways that we worked this year to make shared knowledge accessible. The very first thing was to develop a code of conduct for our organization. Previously to my coming on board with Rocky Linux, the team leaders had basically managed every case on a case-by-case basis. And that can become exhausting after a while, and it can also lead to enforcement of a non-stated rule happening sporadically or inconsistently. So the value of a code of conduct is that it's all out there, it's stated, and everybody can know what the standard is before they even walk into the place. We're telling them, these are the walls, this is a safe space, you can come in, before they ever come in. So our code of conduct includes these specific elements. We included a pledge that the community, that we make to the community. It includes our set of standards. What is appropriate behavior for us? What is the scope of that enforcement, which for us is anything that happens on a community channel, anything that happens or on an official channel, anything that happens at an event with somebody who's representing the organization, and anything that happens within an email that is represented by the organization. We also make sure that we know our attribution, where we're getting this from. For the most part, our code of conduct is out there, and you can find it on our website, and you can see the attribution in it. It's a popular one in several of the open source projects that we looked at, but it wasn't just adopted without reading through it. We did concur with it, with each part of it, and vote on it as a group to say, yes, this is our code. So in essence, our code of conduct includes examples of positive behaviors we would love to see exemplified in our community, such as kindness and open-mindedness, and examples of behaviors that are considered offensive, which I'm sure you can imagine. Just speaking harshly or speaking untruths, obviously, but there are also other things that are elaborated in our code of conduct. And then it outlines the consequences of that behavior. So the reason that this is important is because when newcomers read this code of conduct, they see it and they know they'll be protected. But when we enforce it, then they will feel protected. I have to keep conveying this over and over, how important it is to have it and to enforce it, because the people who feel threatened by offensive behaviors within a project aren't going to speak up. They're just going to disappear. And so for the community to feel safe and to thrive, they need to see examples of enforcement. So after the code of conduct, which we finally got implemented in March of this year, there's making the project organized. We want to have the documentation and the community wiki that tells you everything that you need to know about the project. As I said, I came in through the documentation part of the project, so definitely I'm always out here advocating for documentation. Good documentation and plentiful documentation. Those are two big values of our project that we've had ever since I discovered this group. So what makes a bit of documentation excellent? We think the first value is to have it be accessible. So that would include having a standard pre-reading layout for all documents. It would include a review for any gendered and other outdated kinds of language in the documents. It's kept up to date. We have a minor revision every 6 months of our software and a major revision every few years. And we have to make sure sometimes that the tutorials are still effective. It also needs to be supported on a variety of browsers and supported across a range of devices. And then, of course, have actual literal accessibility features, making them easy to be used by people accessing our website and our documents with disabilities. This is just a quick example of one of our documents. It shows the prerequisites, so the hardware that you would need in order to run this tutorial, the assumptions that we're making about you as a reader, what sort of ability level do you have, and what kind of access do you have, and then a little introduction to what are we about to talk about here. That just sets readers up for understanding what they're about to read. So the second thing, besides being accessible, is to make it easy to contribute to the documentation. So that would make it easy to find the starting point. We have a button, I think it's within the second nested menu of the Rocky Linux site called Contribute. So you can find that and figure out how to get started with our documentation. It should be easy to comprehend, specifically by people who are using English as a second language. We do have documentation available in multiple languages. However, our main documents are all in English. And we are a global community, so we have to make it, especially because it's all translated into other languages, we try to use as few vernacular sayings as possible. Just use as straightforward, basic English as we can. It needs to be easy to contact a human for help, and then we need to have tutorials for more complex content. All of that's just for the documentation. So the third part of making knowledge accessible is to look at your community wiki, which is where all the notes go. A project is accessible when a visitor can easily find notes from previous meetings, links to recorded meetings, any blog posts we've written about ourselves, about the project, or presentations. Like this is probably a presentation that should be added into our project for people to be able to discover and to learn about us from it. Did I go backward? Oh, okay. So you can see here, I don't know why I chose black mode, but I did. So this community team wiki, this just is our introductory page for our community team within, I think it's within GitHub. Over here you can see we have community meeting notes, our roadmap, our past events, our event reports. All of these are pieces of public information that we have. I'm sure we need to add more. That's how far we've gotten so far. But maybe your project doesn't even have notes yet. Maybe you're not even having meetings yet. So, spoiler alert, it's a good idea to have regular meetings so that you have something to document, so that you can put it out there so people can find you and then come to your meetings. It's all this wonderful big circle of helping your community be more healthy. And then you can put it all together. At the beginning of, I guess this would be in the beginning of your repository on GitHub, you would have a README file, and it would collect all of these different things. Some of the things are held within GitHub, but some things may be on YouTube or maybe within another kind of document. So you want to have a README at the beginning of your, as early as people can find it, wherever you can have people find it. That includes your code of conduct or a link to it, a link to your documentation, to your community wiki, to all of your meeting notes, recordings, presentations, and blog posts. This is something we're going to call a single point of entry. This is where do you want everybody to land? They can go everywhere from there, but where's the number one spot? And then in that README, you're also going to want to include an intro statement that explains what the project is, what you're all about, your history if you want, or your ideas for the future, your vision, all of that. And again, this is another advice. If you haven't written an intro statement for your project yet, you can make a blog post with that. And again, then you'll have something to add to your shared knowledge. So that is basically our little bit of, that's been my mission for this year, and I would love to hope that some of this is inspiring to you. And then I'm going to have Jonas talk a little bit about the idea of making shared knowledge accessible is one piece of a bigger thing. So I'll have Jonas come and talk about what the bigger thing is, but hopefully you at least have this practical thing that you can move forward with.
Before I hop on, can you talk a little about the translation of your documentation?
How it happens?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I was asked to talk a little bit more about the translation of our documentation, which, like I said, happens primarily in English. The main documentation is all in English. We have a team of localization translators who work. We have an application we're using called Crowdin right now. So all of the documents, whenever you update a document in English, it makes work for the translators, but it's okay, they don't mind. So it goes all through Crowdin, and Crowdin translates it, and then the translators will go and verify that it actually translated, accurately to the intent of it. And so we have people who are dedicated to, I want to say 10. I know we have at least 4 versions or 4 languages that have all the documentation. But I know we have some documentation in more languages than that. Does that answer what you were thinking about? Excellent. And real quick, can I say the other thing? There's actually one more thing I did learn from that I would like to share with you today. The biggest thing was the shared documentation or shared knowledge. But the second thing is how important it is for a community manager to always travel with swag. So I have an enamel pen for everybody if you would like today, and I have some Rocky Linux stickers that are very cool. They're the kind you peel off the back. Peel off the back and then stick it down and then peel off the front, and it'll go nice on your laptop or wherever you want to put it. They're really cool, so come get one at the end. Jonas has a little bit left, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Krista. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is this notion of a community health check. So one of the things that we did for the Rocky project early this year, as I got involved, was to run what we call a community health check. As I said before, communities are organisms, living, breathing organisms. We need to check their health, just like you go to the doctors, hopefully, and get yourself checked up. So we do the same thing for the community. And I have a repository. We forgot to add the link here, but I'm happy to share that later on. We have a repository with all this information. It's based on knowledge and information and experiences from the chaos and the to-do group. And it essentially boils down to how healthy is your community? One thing that I get asked a lot is, how do you measure success of a community? How do you make a community successful? And I tell everyone that I do not measure success. I measure health. Because that way I can improve the community, have a healthy community with a lot of contributors, people that want to engage, people that are writing code or non-code contributions. Maybe they're hosting events. We want to have a healthy community rather than try to have a successful community. The community success comes from having a healthy community. So this community health checks goes through a bunch of various portions of the open source project in general. So we look at, is the documentation good? That's very subjective, obviously, but we take a look at the documentation. Is it good or not? Are we missing large pieces? Then we need to refocus on this. We look at how attentive the maintainers are. So I mentioned this earlier. How quick are the maintainers to respond to issues, respond to PRs, do reviews of PRs? There's an open source project that I use right now that has had a PR going for 2 years, and they're still discussing that PR in the PR itself. Hopefully it'll be merged soon, but it can take a long time. But even though it's been going on for 2 years, people are still invested in that specific PR because they want to see that feature in the project. So they're trying to revamp it and make sure it works with the newer versions that have come out since the initial PR. And people are really engaging there. And then we measure how many contributors we have. Are we growing? That could be good. Are we declining? That could be bad. But it all depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to onboard new contributors, you can't onboard 1,000 contributors at a time, because that's just impossible. So if you see that you have a ton of new contributors coming up, fantastic, but do you actually have time to handle all that onboarding? Do you have time to handle all the issues and the PRs that are coming in? So make sure to staff the maintainer team and the community team and the onboarding team properly there. So there are a bunch of various factors in this community health check, and as I said, we forgot the link here, but you can find us. Yes, you can find us. So please reach out to me or Krista. Would love to chat with you, and of course, please come up here once we're done. I would love to chat with you all. Yeah, and that's the end of the presentation.